Sentite? Sì, molto bene. Buonasera a tutti e a tutte. Benvenuti e benvenute al Museo Egizio stasera per la nostra conferenza. Io sono Shenali Boanghe, lavoro qua come egittologa e educatrice museale e stasera la conferenza sarà in lingua inglese con la traduzione simultanea, quindi adesso passo all'inglese. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today at Museo Egizio for our lecture and part of our lecture series for 2025 and 2026. It's so lovely to see you all here in Museo Egizio, and we also say a big welcome to everyone joining us online through our social media channels from home and from all around the world. So we would also like to thank ACME, amici collaboratori del Museo Egizio, for organizing and helping us host this conference this evening. And as I mentioned in Italian, my name is Shenali Boanghe. I work here as an Egyptologist and as a museum education officer, particularly looking at public engagement, museum outreach, and learning, working with the community. Now, before I introduce our special guest for this evening, I just wanted to mention a couple of logistics for the evening. So tonight's presentation will be around 1 hour long, and this will also include questions. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, please keep them in mind, and we can have a discussion at the end. And if there are any questions online, for our viewers online, please do write them in the comments section, and we'll try and respond to them to the best of our ability. So, one more thing, I also ask if you could please put your phones on silent for the duration of the talk. This way we won't have any disturbances. With the logistics out of the way, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Nicola Bird, who is joining us all the way from Oxford. So it's also Nicola's first time in Turin, and we're very, very excited to have her here with us. So Nicola's presentation is entitled The International Multaka Network, the Evolving Role of Museums as Places of Belonging in a World Shaped by Migration. Now, what is the Multaka International Network? Nicola will soon tell us more and about the work that she's doing in Oxford. And I would also like to mention very quickly that since 2000, as a curator here at the museum, we've had the pleasure to be a part of this international network. A couple of the projects that we have at the museum that are involved within this framework are looking at working with people from multicultural and migrant backgrounds, looking at learning Italian in the galleries, and also working with Arabic-speaking tour guides working as volunteers. Now, I've spoken a lot. I want to tell you more about my lovely guest that I have with us here. Nicola Bird is the project manager of the multi-award-winning Multaka Oxford project, based in the History of Science Museum and Pitt Rivers Museum at the University of Oxford. For over 30 years, Nicola has combined her passion for equality of access to education, culture, and the arts within her professional roles as a teacher and trainer, as well as working in community engagement practice and management, specializing in equitable practice in museums and heritage. Since 2012, Nicola has worked at the University of Oxford's gardens, libraries, and museums with value-based, person-centered approaches to ensure better global representation and perspectives within the museum collections and activities. So if we could all please give Nicola a very warm welcome.
I didn't know Shenali was going to leave me. Thank you, Shenali, and thank you so much for having me in this beautiful city. equally as beautiful museum. I've been blown away today by walking through the streets, walking through the museum. I'm really honoured to be here this evening. So thank you very much for such a warm welcome. Today I'm going to introduce Multaka Oxford to you. And I think it's really important to know that whatever we do, we don't do on our own. Nothing is in isolation. And as Shonali described, it's part of an international network. We come from different cities, different countries, different museums, and our work looks very different. But the values that underpin our work is what brings us together, is what unites us and connects us. So this is what I'm going to go through today. And I'm also going to give you some case studies and some examples. And then I'm going to talk about deep social impact in our society. Now, before I came today, I watched a lot of the lectures online that have been recorded. And I went down some amazing journeys. And it was really interesting to reflect on last year's series, What is a Museum? So I found it particularly resonating because it had museums from all over, and the museums are so different, but there were threads going through their lectures which connected them all. So if you can take anything away today, is that actually we have things that connect us all in our work, in our lives, wherever we're from, wherever we work. So I just want us to think about our society. I want us to think about when society began. So since it began, it has evolved, it has changed. One guarantee is that things are constantly changing in our world. Sometimes it's very obvious through migration and people moving around the world, but it makes our societies dynamic. It makes life vibrant. Now, coming from the UK, obviously a lot of changes happens through our history of empire, which caused a lot of harm all around the world. But actually trade, science, arts, technical advancement, every part of it is about movement, migration and collaboration. And the secret to our societies and the development of our societies is exchange and interconnectedness. And that has been for millennia. So museums not only house the objects that tell these stories of science, culture, art, but also they're places of knowledge, of engagement, of inspiration and of learning. So we'll look at today, as society evolves around us, actually the museum also evolves. And the Multaka projects and the different type of work that we all do looks at how we can bring that dynamism into our practice, how we can change our practice to reflect the world outside the museum walls. So museums don't remain static, they're constantly changing. They're not a museum of museums, even though I do work in the Pit Rivers, which everybody knows is known to be a museum of museums, but actually the Pit Rivers is always reflecting on its positionality and relevancy in its contemporary world. So I'm based at the University of Oxford, so a place which has been around for a long time, is known for its elitism, has literally walls that are there to keep people out. But I run a project which is about bringing people in, not just bringing people in to serve them, but bringing people in to work in partnership, collaboration, and to change how the museum works. It's a place where we see each other as people, primarily. We care about people. The objects sing their songs, but people tell their stories. So I manage the project. It's part of a Multaka network. It's in 2 of the museums in Oxford, but actually across Europe. It's in this museum, in the Museo Egizio, but also there's a project in Florence called the EMEA project, and this is around museums across Florence, and also in the museums based on the Museum Island in Berlin, and in the University of Zaragoza. There have been more projects in the past, based in Athens, in Switzerland, in Bern, but actually funding and short-term funding means that this is a world that comes and goes. So that's another thing that we'll reflect on. So, I've spliced the museums here. So the museums are abstract to many people in Oxford. They're not places where people go beyond school. They're dragged by school, and then they sort of taper off. So I think it's a common experience had in many cities. But before we think about what the museums and how they're changing, I want us to think about when these museums were built, when this museum was built. And the world that they were built in is very different to the world now. I think we can all accept that. So I want to start off with the History of Science Museum. This is a museum which, I get my words mixed up here, so please excuse me. So it was the first purpose-built museum which still remains open as a museum in the world. You can see how I get a lot of words mixed up there. It was built in 1684. And it was built in a society where the natural philosophy, so natural science hadn't started yet, it was natural philosophy. And it was when this new topic was suddenly being introduced into Oxford University. Now, before that it was theology and classics, but there was this new subject that the learned people needed to have, to be a rounded member of the learned classes. So a collection was given to the university by Elias Ashmole. So his collection led to the Ashmolean, which is also in Oxford today. And it was built on the philosophy and principles of a man called Francis Bacon, which was looking at the natural world and trying to categorize it, trying to study it. Mainly to celebrate God's creation, but it started that path into the sciences, to the Enlightenment that we're all really aware of. Now in Oxford, because this is very Oxford-based, they built a museum to house these objects, but it was very forward-thinking. It allowed the public into the collection, so it was very contemporary. But it was only one floor was a museum. There were two other floors. The middle floor was one of learning and of lectures, and the bottom floor was a chemistry laboratory. And the walls are so thick because they are built to withstand the explosions that were happening in that basement at the time. So you can see the museum itself was a place of experimentation, of learning, of inspiration. And it was so forward-thinking that it even allowed women into this space. Over 100 years, it changed, doing many things, and actually, during the Age of the Enlightenment, the collection got split. They built the Natural History Museum in Oxford, and many of the natural specimens went there. The arts went to the University Art Gallery, which is now the big Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And this museum sort of stayed open, was administrative offices, but then was re-established as the Museum of the History of Science in 1924, which only just celebrated its 100 years. So, as you can see in the pictures, it categorizes the world around it. Before it was a cabinet of curiosity, but now it's one which looks at the evolution of scientific instruments. So this is one museum. The other museum was being built at the same time. So this is the Pitt Rivers Museum, and this, I always got to read his name. This came about because of a British lieutenant in the British Army, and his name was Lieutenant General Augustus Henry Lane Fox Pitt Rivers. So that was his name. He inherited the Pitt Rivers part of his name when he inherited a huge wealth off an old uncle. But he travelled the world trying to improve firearms for the British Army. And as he travelled, he collected. Now, he gave his collection to the University of Oxford, but on the premise that a museum was built, and it was a place of learning. And it was also a place where the objects would be looked after. But it was built at the back of this museum. This is the Natural History Museum. And because he was a person that as you walked through the cases in his museum, he wanted the public to realize they were at the pinnacle of civilized society. So he was an evolutional anthropologist, and therefore he set out the objects in types. So not geographical or cultural areas, but you have masks, musical instruments, textiles. And this is now celebrated for its diversity of how we all approach similar parts of who we are as people. But then it was to show an evolution of civilized society. So it was based on racial hierarchy. And it was also part of what was considered natural history. So you can see the dominant ideologies of the time coming through literally to the building of the bricks. The Pitt Rivers today doesn't look that much different. Its work is very different. They've taken all human remains off display. They actually do a lot of repatriation now. They do a lot of ceremonies, which is about healing, which is about releasing objects from the society's cultures and families that the objects were taken, bought from, and acquired from. So this is the context. But I think it's really important to think about when they were built. They were forward-thinking then. That was 100, 200, 300 years ago. So now we're really thinking about our world now. So I'm going to bring you to the Multaka Oxford project. Now remember, this is happening in many cities around Europe, but I'm going to focus in on Oxford, so we all look very different. Now, as you can see, people are at the heart of our work. We have people from 40 different countries that are part of Multaka. We have over 300 volunteers have been part of the project. So it's a big project. We're considered a team. It's not a team of staff and then volunteers come to help us. It's a team of staff and volunteers that work together really closely. We started in 2017, so our 8th year of practice, and I have known Alicia since 2018 when we first met in Berlin. The Multaka project in Berlin was considered the mother of Multaka projects. And this is because they started doing tours in Arabic and Farsi when the conflicts in the Middle East started at that time. There was a group of students in Berlin that couldn't go home, and so they started thinking about how to welcome communities that were finding themselves settling in Berlin at the time due to the conflict. Now, Oxford is a very multicultural society. It's also a resettlement city. So we have many people from many parts of the world making Oxford their home. And when you want to make a city your home, you need to belong to that city. You need to find your place in that city and make it your home. So nothing happens overnight. And I think that the work that we do is all about trust and about actually working together and finding out how to work together. So we started and we thought, okay, we know what we're doing here. I've got a community engagement background. Let's invite families in. Let's serve the community. We've got objects from their homes. Let's show the objects. Let's do fun things. Let's play games. Let's have poetry evenings in different languages. Let's have celebration evenings with music from all around the world. And we thought we were doing a really good job. And then we started asking what people thought. We started saying, would you like to present with us and about our great work? And it was in that moment where people said, it's okay, it's nice, but it's not actually very helpful. It's nice for you, it's nice for the museum. We think that you think you're doing a good job, and it is very nice, but nothing changes. We come and then we go. We never come back. What we need to learn English, we need jobs, we need work experience, we need to understand how the UK works, how British discourse in organisations work, because that gets us jobs, that gets us settled, that makes sure that we can put food in front of our families, that makes sure our children are confident when they go to school, because we're confident we can read the letters that come home from school. But we were like, but we're a museum. Surely museums don't perform that sort of community work. So we had to rethink. The museums are places of learning, of inspiration, but they are homes to objects from all around the world. Why can they not be a home to the people where these objects come from, whose heritage are entwined, and identity are entwined in those objects? Why can't we broaden the role of the museum? Not go outside the conservation, preservation, learning, knowledge, research, studying part of the museum. That has to remain. So it's not in conflict, but it's to broaden. It's start to think of what role does this museum play in our contemporary society, not a society of 200 years ago. So that's where we started to really think. And then we started to co-design the work that we were doing to make sure, yes, the museum's doing a good job. We get deeper research, we get deeper interpretation, we get a more inclusive approach to our work. But actually, we are also making it a place of healing, of belonging, a place where people can come, leave the things outside the door sometimes, and just be the person they are, be the teacher that they train to be the professor where they taught students before, be a woodworker, be a person that they are, and be defined by the person that they are, rather than a label such as refugee or person seeking asylum or a person who's from a different country. So that's where we started. So I'm going to show you some examples of what we do. And I'm going to keep reminding you that this is museum work. And then I'm going to tell you the different and broader roles that this work actually fulfills. So this year, a celebration of spring. Now, remember, I work in a history of science museum and a museum of anthropology. Now, how can we have a cultural event in a history of science museum? How can that work? Surely we're going off topic. But the spring equinox of this year is something which human society has looked at, has measured, has influenced how all of our societies live and work since Neolithic times. So we thought, okay, let's look at the spring equinox. Let's look at the measurement, the calendars, the way the spring impacts our world, and how therefore we try and measure time and the seasons. We try and measure time with the solar system. That was way before the smartwatches that we wear on our wrists now. But this was how the world works. This is the history of science and scientific knowledge. So, one weekend, we had a dual event, a science-based event, which looked at the calendars that people use around the world. We looked at the measurement systems of how you tell time, how you tell the seasons, how that impacts our lives. The objects are all based in the History of Science Museum. But through the volunteers that are part of our team, we also learned about Ethiopian calendars, where it is the year 2018 at the 15 months in the Ethiopian calendar. So we learned about Ethiopian calendars, we learned about different counting systems, we learned about Chinese feng shui calendars and agricultural calendars, and all the different ways that we measure time. In the Pit Rivers, on the same day, we also had the celebration, cultural celebrations that were happening 2 weeks around this. Now, this year was a very special year. Around the spring equinox, you have Nowruz, which is the Persian and Kurdish New Year, but you also had Easter, the Orthodox Easter, and then you also had Eid this year. So we took this 2 weeks, we looked at it scientifically, we looked at it through faith, and we looked at it through celebration. So we had 3 tables in the Pit Rivers, one which discussed Eid and Ramadan, one which discussed Nowruz and the New Year, and another table which looked at Easter. The museum is full of objects which people express their faith through. And we look at those objects, but we don't understand them. They don't explain how they're used. They don't explain why they're important. So we had 3 tables where the public could come and learn from people who follow those faiths why this is such an important 2 weeks. And then you could go and make an Eid box and fill it with sweets. You could paint Ukrainian Easter eggs. So we were bringing in science, culture, faith, and our society. But people were right at the center. Dialogue was right at the center. And it was all about conversation and connecting. And I remember I was standing at one of the tables and I picked up the Quran and I said to a woman, "Have you ever looked at a Quran?" And she was saying, "I didn't know I could actually hold one if I wasn't Muslim." So there are all of these messages that if you allow people to have a conversation, that's where we're learning. But the museum is still doing its core role, which is inspiration, learning, engagement. I'm going to skip on to this one. And when you come to community-centered work and people-centered work, sometimes we think we leave the seriousness of the work. But in 2024, we were invited to be the presidents of the History of Science for the British Science Festival. So this is hundreds of secondary schools, so teenagers coming through and learning about science. And they could come to our keynote speech. So again, we got a team of people from all around the world. How are we going to be the presidents of the history of science? It did feel a little bit pressurized. And over 3 months, we just explored the subject. How are we connected through science? And we took the metaphor and the symbol of the Silk Road. Now, the Silk Road is a perfect symbol of how we're all connected. Through trade, actually, that led to the development of scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, languages, how the fusion of faiths, the movement of people led to the movement of so many things that our societies have benefited from. And over 3 months, we designed it with our team. And we looked at maps, because maps during the Silk Road are very different to the maps that we have now. They were more representations of the world rather than, something to navigate with. We looked at medicine, we looked at astronomy, and we linked the astronomical maps that we use today, we linked them back to 2,000 years. So we looked at how the history of science is actually a global history. And through our project, we showed the interconnectedness of us in what we consider our history. I'm going to come back to museum work. We travel, we teach, we train, we give presentations, we do conferences, but this is actually all through a team together. So what we have on this side, my right, your left, this was a decolonization workshop. Now, colonization, the British Empire, decolonization are actually really important topics that are going through the UK, as expected. But we don't stand and teach it on our own. Actually, in Multaka, we bring volunteers who come from countries that have been colonized, that are able to talk about the impact of colonization on their society and on the world today. And then we can start discussing what decolonization looks like. It can't be a small group of people who are deciding what decolonization looks like. So If you bring in more voices, you do have more opinions, but you know as you navigate forward that you'll be in a space which is listening to all. So we had 3 women that joined us, and we had a woman from Pakistan, a woman from Afghanistan, and a woman from Namibia. Now, those 3 women come from countries where colonization have had a deep impact. Maybe they've been colonized by many different countries, and also neo-colonialism as well. The brain drain of a country that's happening today as people are having to move through conflict. So things that we consider in the past, we bring into the contemporary world. We also have conferences, and you might recognize Shanali. Yeah, you're right at the front there. We have conferences, but again, our team is right at the center of those conferences. You're hearing many voices. We have a topic, but you hear many perspectives. We do displays together. Now, this display opened on Friday. We're absolutely delighted. Now, it doesn't need to be a display which is in conflict to the core displays of the museum. This is one case. One case and a trail leads you around the museum, but gives you a different perspective to the one that is already there. Now, why is this important? Why do we have to have trails with many voices in it? Well, that's because those voices speak to many diverse voices. Museum directors and museum staff are saying, how do we make museums more accessible? How do we get more people in? How do we get more diverse communities in? You do that by changing the approach to the way you do your work. And Multaka Oxford is one approach among many of how you bring voices directly into the planning and delivery of your work to make it more relevant to more people within your community. Within our team, I am the only person that doesn't speak a variety of languages. So we have people who've experienced forced migration within our staff team. We have people who speak multiple languages. We have multiple faiths in our team. And therefore, when we're planning, we're not othering anybody. We're not speaking about them. We're speaking about what we're going to do together. And that changes the dynamic from the start. So this is one case. We're allowed one case in the Pit Rivers. And this looks at craft, how we all make things. So you might take embroidery, for example, and the embroidery of Ukraine, Palestine, Afghanistan. It all imbues identity. But also, it imbues resistance. It imbues protecting your heritage as the world around you falls into turmoil. And it's a trail. Anybody can pick up this trail. It has many languages in it. It has many ways of looking at different objects. It's relevant to a lot more people. It's not pitting people against each other. It's not saying this is disrupting the main voice of the museum. It's actually saying we're bringing more voices in. We're making it more relevant. We see more diverse people come through the door. In the History of Science Museum, we also do displays. And this is working with a local school. And the History of Science Museum is a place which has a world-renowned collection of astrolabes and filigree spheres and all sorts of objects which are, up to 1,000 years old, some of these objects. But they weren't built as scientific objects. This is the world where science, culture, faith, and art were all part of an object. And this is how we can engage young people in these objects. This is how we can take an object and we can look at the Islamic art in that object to make it relevant. We can ask young people to create their own objects, put them on display. So there are many different approaches that we take, and over 7 years, we've engaged with over 30,000 people in person. Over 4 million people online. This is not work which is working with a small community group. This is work which resonates with many people, and it makes it very relevant to a lot more people. So we get high numbers. On Friday, we had an event. 1,000 people came through the doors of the Pit Rivers Museum. Now, in a museum this size, 1,000 people probably isn't very much, but it was very, very busy. Now, what's really going on here is actually we are working with a group of people that might have experienced trauma. They might be a PhD student from Oxford University. As I said, it's not the label that brings people into the project, it's the fact that people want to come and be part of a team. They want to be part of a cultural program which is all about respect, about doing interconnected, intercultural dialogue. And that's what we form. We form teams where this is what we do together. Lots of different things go on. People learn English. People find a community with like-minded people. We have a social program where once a month we do something around Oxford, have a cup of tea, have a cup of cake, go around a botanic garden. But that's because you invest in teams. People aren't volunteers that are coming in to help the museum. They're coming in, they're part of the team. So you look after them. We do CV writing workshops. So we're not actually expecting to hold people, but we know that Multaka is a place where people can come and then they move on onto their journey. So we consider ourselves a piece of the jigsaw that is their journey, their lives. I think when I was watching the lecture series, and I spent many an hour watching those lecture series, what I found really interesting is that they talked about museums having the civil role, holding civil values in our society. And that really made me think, when we're thinking about work like this, when we're thinking about working with our communities as equals, when we're thinking about expanding the role of the museum, this isn't in conflict with the museum. Our world likes to talk about division, but again, we're not going to listen to those voices. Instead, this isn't about disrupting the status quo or challenging power. This is about bringing in more voices, deepening research, improving the database, improving the knowledge, reaching more people, making it more accessible, speaking more languages, both metaphorically and literally. And also, it's a place where we're thinking very deeply about what do the objects do. Now, the dress that you see here, this was from a fashion show that we did. We had a fashion show coming through the museum, but this is the Uyghur language. So the Uyghur are a community of a Muslim community based in China, and they are a community under threat. But this was a place where you could use that language and be proud. We also have the impact on our young people in our schools, young people which have a mixture of identity. Their families come from one country, they're growing up in another country, they speak at least 2 languages fluently, but they're being pulled in multiple directions. Do they assimilate? Are they proud of who they are? Again, how do the museums and the objects support young people as they step forward as the next generation that coming into our world of work, our society, our culture, our artists, our teachers? And also, how are we making sure that the objects have that resilience, hold people's heritage, especially in this world where we have lots and lots of different changes going on through conflict? Also, my experience is that funding comes in. This is not a project which costs money. Over the last 8 years, this project has brought in £1.3 million into the museum. So philanthropists are interested in this work. We think strategically. We're thinking about health and well-being. We're thinking about inclusion. We're thinking about deepening knowledge, as well as the repatriation and research. We're part of a university. We're thinking about how do We make the public institutions support the university in its research. So this isn't community work, we're working with small partners. This is a project which brings in funding, it brings in research, and it brings in more knowledge, more global knowledge, more relevancy. It helps us reflect on what is the role in our world today. So, when we're thinking about our civic values that we hold so dear, that these museums were brought and were built to represent and to be forward-thinking, when we're thinking of freedom, equality, beauty, how do our museums have those roles today? What does that mean in our world today? Now, the work at the Museo Egizio with the language students, the work in Berlin with the tours and the toolbox that they use to talk about migration in schools, the work in EMEA in Florence, where they're actually looking at how you can walk through a museum which is based around the faith, the Christianity, but then actually you find the links between Islam and Christianity. So you find how we are all interconnected. We were interconnected, we still are interconnected. You looked at Zaragoza, that look at the architecture of the city and the impact of the Ottoman Empire on the city, and actually the interconnectedness we find beautiful. So these projects, this international network, we all do really different work. But what we're underpinned by is the movement of people, the interconnectedness and intercultural language is what brings us together. And we create communities. We create communities not based on who people tell us we are. We create communities on who we really are and how we really want to connect with people. And the museums are at the heart of it. The collections are at the heart of it. So I think it's really interesting to now think how our world has changed and how the role of the museums expand to actually meet those challenges. You left me. I felt very alone then when I stopped. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you. I was busy writing and I was just taking it all in. A big thank you to Nicola Bird for her incredible presentation. I know I'm feeling incredibly motivated and inspired. I'd like to open up to the audience, if anyone has any questions or comments, if we have any questions online as well. No? Yeah? Okay. Io posso venire? Sì, sì, posso stare. Domani
Posso parlare inglese, ma non voglio usare questo.
come lei sei?
Buonasera, intanto grazie per la sua condivisione così gioiosa ed entusiasta. Io sono un'insegnante di italiano, ma raccolgo anche storie di migrazione, mi occupo da diversi anni di intercultura. Allora, mi chiedo, nei vostri laboratori sulla decolonizzazione, se ci sono stati dei momenti conflittuali intorno a degli oggetti e se di questi oggetti si è provato a ricostruire una storia, immaginare una storia. Uno. Due, questo network ad Oxford si svolge all'interno appunto di un museo della scienza, no? E oggi, da diversi secoli, la scienza occidentale, no, viene vista come appunto la scienza. E vedo che ci sono poi appunto delle citazioni molto belle del mondo islamico che ha dato dei contributi importantissimi alla scienza. C'è anche questo grande divulgatore della BBC, Jim Al-Khalili, non so se lo conosce, che è un grande divulgatore iracheno della scienza. Allora, se c'è anche un spazio a altri punti di vista, no? Che ovviamente oggi in una narrazione mondiale non hanno una grande forza, ma a cui è importante dare uno spazio, soprattutto in un spazio culturale così importante. Non so se la domanda sia chiara.
Ok, iniziamo con la prima. Ok, magari devo chiedere di ripetere, per favore. Sì. This lady works as a teacher nella storia, giusto? Storia... Okay, story and stories of migration as well. And her first question was based on the workshops that you do looking at colonialization and decolonization. And if there were any conflicting ideas during the workshops when working with the objects. Penso di aver...
Sì, e se intorno a quegli oggetti si costruisce una storia, una ricostruzione della storia, se si immagina una storia.
Okay, and if there are other stories created using these as a basis, basically. So looking at the colonial stories and if there are any conflicting ideas, and if you can build upon stories that way.
Thank you for your question. There are conflicting stories, and there is hurt and there is harm that has been created by colonialism and empire. That we cannot avoid the reality of our world. When we discuss these periods of time and the objects that have been stolen, many of the objects have been looted and stolen in the UK. Many have been bought, but many have been looted and stolen. It's a place of dialogue and critical dialogue sometimes. We can't fix the problems of the past, but we can move forward in a place which is actually more equitable and fair. Now, there will be moments where it is uncomfortable, and we have to allow that space to be uncomfortable. In my experience, those discussions are unavoidable, and we can't fix them, but what we can do is give them space, and then we can choose how we're going to move on together. There have been moments, we make many mistakes. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything we do is perfect. So there have been moments where we've had some real opposite opinions in the room. And then we have to choose what we're going to do next. We're going to have to choose, do we abort? Do we just forget this? Or we're going to have to choose, how then are we going to move on as a team from this point? From my experience, giving people the space to actually voice their opinion, even though it might be something that others don't want to hear, is usually what's really important, because it's when we silence people and when we edit people that we're causing more harm. Deciding collaboratively what the next steps are is actually part of the process where we are deciding together what we're going to do about this. There has to be moments where you just decide, let's take that off. Let's change that label. Let's change that point in the database because it's wrong. And that's where you bring in the wider teams, because you want to make sure that the steps you are taking are ones of healing. And that is part of the decolonisation process. But also part of the decolonization process is the fact that everyone in that room is respected and their voice is as equal as others. And I think sometimes it is uncomfortable and that's unavoidable. But what I find, and this is very sincere, what I find is when you move from that place together, it's a place of mutual respect. And it's a place where other people suddenly, they're not scared of their differences because they've voiced them, and actually then you can start finding your similarities.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Devo chiedervi per favore la seconda domanda.
Sì, se nel museo, dato che è un museo della scienza ed è un museo che appunto dà una grande importanza alla migrazione, quindi ad altri saperi, e ho visto ci sono anche reperti del mondo islamico, sia contemplato uno spazio di confronto anche storico con la scienza islamica, anche, pensando anche a questo grande divulgatore che ha la BBC, che è Jim Al-Khalili, che è questo fisico di origini irachene, ma che insomma è il Piero Angelo un po' della BBC, diciamo.
So looking at, seeing as the History of Science Museum is a science-based museum, our question was also looking at the incorporation of also Islamic art and Islamic science, and asking if there's a space to incorporate even more of this as well. And mentioning there's a BBC presenter, and his name is?
Jim Al-Khalili.
Jim Al-Khalidi. Have you heard of Jim Al-Khalidi?
I probably know his face. I'm very good at faces. So yeah, I should know him. If he's from the BBC, I should know him.
Non è importante questo, era importante lo spazio di dialogo tra mondi scientifici.
He creates a space of dialogue as well. But I think the other thing to also mention is it's not just a science museum. You also have different museums with different backgrounds, different collections, also looking at the Multaka network overseas as well. And I think, Nicola, I had a question, very kind of basic question, but what does Multaka mean, and why did the network choose this word to describe the work that the network does?
It's a very good question, thank you. So Multaka is originally an Arabic word, and it means meeting point. So there is no English equivalent. Is there an Italian equivalent?
Punto di incontro. Punto di incontro, meeting point, incontro.
Is that like physical meeting point?
Yeah.
So maybe there's no Italian equivalent either. So there is no English equivalent to the Arabic words, and because it means that you connect, you meet, you share something, you connect. It's about, you might share art, poetry, thoughts, reflections. So we don't have an English word, but with the Arabic is when you come and you meet as people, you meet as minds. And so this is why the original word, the original project in Berlin was playing on that language. Come and find a meeting point in the Berlin museums where you will hear and see people like you. You will hear your languages. You will walk around objects from home. You will connect with people. Then the project started to develop, because what we thought was just museum tour, we realized what was really going on, what was really impacting people. And the Oxford, the director in Berlin, Stefan Weber, and the director of the History of Science Museum, Silke Ackermann, are very good friends. They've worked together many years. So we asked to use their name. And so we started using the brand. And again, this was for communication, it was for unity, but actually the work in Oxford is so different to Berlin. So it means you meet, but it's actually about intercultural dialogue. It's about platforms where there's intercultural learning, and our interconnectedness is part of our work. I've just got a couple. The people are the most important part of our project, as I've been saying. And there's just a couple. I've just got 4 people here. So we've got Valerie and Miller. Valerie is a retired professor of philosophy at Kyiv University. And Miller was on television. She was a journalist in Ukraine. And so they're a couple, they're a married couple. And they are an integral part of the project. But as you can see from their words here, they're talking about, they're away from their family. The news and the heartbreak that they experience on a daily basis, when they come to Multaka, they just feel a little bit lighter. It just helps with their mental health, but also actually it helps that they're not just forced migrants. They're not just refugees. They've done so much in their lives. They're retired now. They've got so many skills that they can give parts back to society, and that's what they want to do. Hira, she was originally from Pakistan, and she was studying English literature at university, and she just talks about how it actually connected in something quite deep in her, how she feels the world is very divided, so she really saw this as a place that she connected with because she sees the interconnectedness of the world, and she just feels that she was being seen as a person. And finally, this is Batul. Batul is from Afghanistan, again, another professor from Kabul University. She is a prolific activist on child marriage in Afghanistan. She's written, I don't know how many books, but she's written 4 books since being in the UK. So she is so proactive. She's always going up to London to sign another book deal. But her work here is she talked about that she really wasn't so sure about the UK. She had settled in the UK, but she had a lot of preconceived ideas. But actually this helped her break her mold, break the trauma from what she had experienced. Actually, it just helped her become a person in the new country that she was settling in, and how she realised that actually the UK could be a place of safety. So the work is all in museums. It's events, it's displays, it's conferences, it's developing toolbox, it's working with school children. But actually then it's got these multiple layers, which is why we were talking about the different roles. And we have people who can't speak any English, but we use Google Translate and we make it happen. And again, I think it's that you find a way to work together.
Perfect, thank you. Do we have other questions? Altre domande? Yes, in the back.
Good evening. When I think of people who take part in these events, I believe they have already done some sort of questioning of their beliefs and are ready to join this type of community. So my question is, do you have any strategies to appeal to those who actually embrace the mainstream narrative and actually are not that much interested in these type of events?
Thank you. I think that's a really important question. The UK is a very interesting place at the moment. I think it's quite similar here. You have very strong views coming from all sides. So I think that's really important. The great thing about being in these public institutions is that lots of people come through the doors. So it is a really good opportunity to actually have a huge, broad spectrum in your audience. Now, we're not here to lecture, we're not here to convince, we're not here, that's not our job, but we are here to use objects and the museum to show a variety, a global, a sort of a wider view of our world. Now, what people take away with them, we're not responsible for that. But we are responsible for the work that we do. Now, what we find here is you might be able to tell what faith people are, maybe if they wear a hijab, but otherwise you can't really tell who we are. And also in the UK, we have lots of people from all around the world, second, third, now fourth generation. So it's very difficult to assume you know who is who or where they're from. So because of that, it means that our work is focused on the topics, either the celebration or the art or the music that we're doing or the training that we're doing. The audience will get a global view. And therefore, we're doing our job as well as we can. And we know that the people who come through the doors are a broad spectrum of society. And we hope that these big social institutions mean that these can be a meeting point where you can have these different views. That's as much as we can do. Otherwise, we're turning into we're lecturing people or trying to convince people. And I think that's where you meet resistance. We demonstrate through evidence. We show what it looks like, and then we leave people to make up their own decisions. I think it's a really important question in today's world.
Altre domande? I think, yes, of course.
Mi scusi, forse non ho capito tutta la conferenza, interessante e mi è piaciuta, però mi pare di aver capito che c'è molto un orientamento verso l'Islam. C'è qualcuno anche dall'Ucraina, mi è parso di capire, ma mi pare che ci sia un grande interesse verso l'Islam. Questo perché? Perché in Inghilterra c'è una grande immigrazione o è proprio perché il museo invece è orientato con molti pezzi islamici? Non ho capito questa cosa.
So the question was, perhaps she didn't completely understand the concept completely of the conference, but through the presentation she understood that there is quite a focus on Islam and the Islamic community in the UK, also migrants and people from migrant backgrounds coming from Ukraine, but she was wondering as to why there's more of a focus on Islam, or is it more comprehensive and involves more and more communities?
Thank you for your question. The project doesn't focus on Islam. It has an Arabic word, but obviously the Arab world is secular in itself. You have Christianity in the Arab world as well as Islam. I think with the projects, many people who are settling in Oxford come from countries where they have had to leave. But also we have a lot of students from Oxford University that are part of the project. We have people from Hong Kong. We have many people from African countries. We have many people from Asian countries, as well as the Middle Eastern and North African countries. I think because of our collections come from, especially in the History of Science Museum, we have these amazing astrolabes. And therefore these collections were around the time when Islam was going through the Persian Empire and the Middle East. And these are beautiful objects, so we do use them a lot. Many of our volunteers speak Arabic because the project has an Arabic name. But actually, I don't think it is about focusing on one religion. It instead looks at who we are as people and our shared humanity. Religion is just one part of that. It is not a religious project. Instead, it's about what do we do as people. Faith and worship is part of what many people do. Many people also don't. But we make things, we embroider, we play music, we study, we research, we harvest. We do all sorts of things, and this is what the project is. The Islamic focus is because we have these amazing collections, and therefore we want them to sing. And it is a museum project. It's also an opportunity for many young people in our society, in Oxford, to really embrace their dual heritage. And with the schools that we work with, that Islamic heritage is part of that dual identity. So I've chosen a few examples there because this is the makeup of our society at the moment. Sadly, it has changed because of even in the 8 years I've been managing this project, there have been numerous conflicts, which meant that we have had different nationalities come into the project because of the English language focus. So what you're seeing is a reflection of the world around us in Oxford and in our work as a place of welcome, as a place of belonging, and seeing how a museum can help Oxfordshire become a place of home for many people who are settling.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I think I just need to check the time.
Yes, look at that.
Yeah, I think if there are no more questions, I think we can give Nicola another round of applause. And once again, a big thank you for coming.
Thank you to the interpreter.
Yes, absolutely. A huge thank you to Gabriele for having translated and interpreted the conference this evening. Thank you so much for making it even more accessible. And we'll see you at Museo Egizio again soon. Buonasera a tutti, grazie mille per essere venuti e spero di vedervi molto 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 presto. Buonasera.